The COVID-19 pandemic has changed conventional ways of doing things, and the education sector has not been spared. The Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill aims to make several oversight changes to the education landscape. However, there are concerns over the law applies to homeschoolers in the country. The bill stipulates that all homeschoolers must be registered with their respective provincial departments of education. For more on the impact of BELA bill on homeschoolers, I'm now joined by Louise Schoonwinkel, the MD at Optimi Home. Louise, good to speak to you. Just give us a sense of what this bill actually means.
Thank you, Hugo. Yes, you're quite right. There's been a lot of concerns about the BELA bill and what the impact is on homeschoolers. And Hugo, I think what people don't realize is that a lot of the provisions that's included in the bill that specifically will govern homeschooling in South Africa is already part of a policy document, the Home Education Policy that was issued in 2018. That's part of the South African Schools Act. So in effect for homeschoolers, not a lot is changing. Something like the registration of homeschoolers have actually been in effect since 2018. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. These regulations have already been at play. It's just been highlighted now with all the public forums and all the traction that the bill has received in the media. So you're quite right. One of the biggest concerns for homeschooling parents is that they have to register with the provincial education department. But as I said, this has been in place since 2018. Parents had to register. The main difference now is that the possible imprisonment if you're not registered has changed from 6 months to a maximum of a year. However, we have not seen the department imprison anyone. At this stage, they just want to keep track of who is actually attending school at one of their public or private schools or who is being homeschooled at home.
So let's talk about this homeschooling community. How big is it? How many kids are learning from home?
So, Hugo, we estimate that there's about 200,000 kids across South Africa who's learning from home. This was at the height during the pandemic. We think it's a bit less now. We think it's around 180,000. But since all homeschoolers aren't registered at the moment, there's really no way to tell what this number really is. I can tell you we're one of the biggest providers and we have 30,000 learners that's registered with us. But then there are also a lot of homeschoolers who don't make use of a curriculum provider, who puts together their own curriculum and uses their own material. So the number is based on research that we've done in the past, but we gather it's between 180 and say 250,000 learners.
So let's talk about the bill and how it strengthens the perception of homeschooling. I mean, certainly there are aspects to it that are protective, particularly of children or kids that should be in school.
Absolutely, Hugo. So I think what people first need to realize is the purpose of the bill is to, first of all, declare homeschooling as a legal alternative to schooling. So that's a great win for South Africans. I think if the bill said you had to be in a public or private school, you're not allowed to homeschool, that would have been a massive loss for the homeschooling community. But first of all, homeschooling is a legal alternative, so you are allowed to homeschool, but there are certain provisions. So, for example, you have to do end-of-phase assessments, you have to use a curriculum that is at least of the same standard as the national curriculum. And the whole purpose of this is the government has to ensure that all learners get an equal opportunity to schooling. So if there's nothing governing homeschooling, how can the government say that they are monitoring this and making sure that kids aren't just staying home and not getting any form of education?
Now, something else that's come up is the start of grade R. In fact, the involvement of grade R is a new compulsory starting age. What does that mean?
So that means for a parent, either you need to enroll your child with a school that offers grade R, or you need to do it yourself at home. We know the government, and especially the president, has been talking about this for a while. So again, this will have a massive impact on our public schools out there who are not all necessarily geared or has capacity to now have this massive intake of grade R learners. And therefore we're expecting that there might be a lot of these learners that would have to fall back onto something like a homeschooling alternative to ensure they don't kick off grade 1 then at a disadvantage.
Well, you raise an issue that we must talk about, and that is the preparedness of government. So they've passed this bill. Are they ready to take on these new grade R learners that previously weren't going to grade R? Is there a capacity? And also let's talk about the numbers. What do those numbers look like of those that weren't starting grade R but now find themselves having to go to grade R?
So you go again, there are no current numbers that I'm aware of that's out there around how many learners did not do grade R in the past that need to do it. I think a lot of learners are doing some sort of informal grade R. They are at some type of a play school who is following a curriculum. Again, this is one of those instances where your learners who are in a very good public or private school is already doing grade R. They're following the same curriculum. And again, your learner who doesn't have access to that type of education is the one who will fall behind. Government says they'll be ready. We'll have to wait and see what the final impact is.
Now, we also understand that the BELA bill requires parents to register for home education, which we've talked about. Now, how does that registration process actually work?
So it differs per provincial department. There's an easy link. Parents apply online. They send in a submission form to the provincial education department, and then they'll receive a response. In a lot of cases, parents do not actually receive a response because these departments are quite behind, especially during COVID, in tackling all the applications. So we always advise parents, if you don't receive a response, just keep your email trail to show that you did try to apply. And then the department can come back and say you've been approved, or they can come back and say you've been declined, but then they have to give you very set reasons why you've been declined, and then parents can appeal. So there's actually parents in KZN who's currently taking the department to court because their application has been declined and they weren't happy with the reasons offered. So this is also something it's not new, but it hasn't really been tested. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out in the next year or two when the regulation starts being tested and more homeschoolers starts registering and being part of the process.
Now, how does government actually monitor the quality of education in homeschools? Now, you're an established entity. You've been in the business, say, a number of years. But what about those that aren't?
And I think that's where the difficulty comes in, Hugo. There's actually no way for government to they can't possibly visit every single child. If we talk about 200,000 learners, you can't do 200,000 home visits to ensure that all these learners are up to date. Just something to note, from grade 10 onwards, learners are not homeschooled anymore. That's distance education, and then you have to do it through a provider like an Impact that's registered with an exam board to obtain your matric. So the regulations are very stringent in grade 10, 11 and 12. Their exams and tests and tasks are all being marked by a provider that's accredited to do so, and they write the same matric examination that all learners write across the country. But up until grade 9, the only current regulation states that you have to follow a curriculum that's on par with the national curriculum, which means the parent can do more. And we find in a lot of instances, homeschool parents do end up doing more. They have more time, they're more involved, but they can do more. And then you're supposed to get a competent assessor to assess a learner at the end of a phase. So grade 3, grade 6, grade 9, you're supposed to get a qualified teacher in to assess the learner. There's no clear definition on what a competent assessor would mean. Currently, however, that's not regulated. So in a lot of instances, if you're not working through a provider like us, where you know your assessment is on standard, we can mark it for you, we can assess it for you. There are parents who themselves will decide, I think my child is ready to progress to the next grade.
Louise, I appreciate your time this afternoon.